Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for December 10th, 2020. Today's topic is all about a presentation that Veeam did at Tech Field Day 22. They covered a lot of stuff in their session. Let me tell you, it was a packed 2 hours. But there was something that jumped out at me, and it was a discussion that I had with some of the team about mobility. And if you're like, what do you mean by mobility? I'm going to get to that in a moment. But first, I want to check in. How you doing? How everything's going? How's Thursday treating you? I mean, Thursday's almost over for me. This is coming in pretty late. I'm not going to lie. It has a lot to do with the hustle and bustle of my day. I was deep in some Kubernetes work. I was learning about OpenShift. I was talking to people at Red Hat. I was going to a presentation from Veeam. And then my son, he had to take him to the dentist. It was a day. It was a day. And so now it's like almost 9 o'clock at night, and I'm finally getting to this post, and that's just the day. So I hope your day has been at least interesting. Oh, and GitHub Universe is also going on, which there's so many things I want to watch from that, but it's been crazy. Let's talk about Veeam. That's the thing that I came here to talk about. It's Veeam and mobility. So I'm a delegate for Tech Field Day 22. That's going on right now, and it finishes tomorrow. That's Friday the 11th. Now, you can watch the live streams. They're available on the Tech Field Day page, and I'll include a link down in the description. If that's the sort of thing you want to watch live, there's some really good companies presenting tomorrow. So definitely tune in for that if you have the opportunity. The companies that presented for me today was Veeam and Red Hat. And Veeam really wanted to talk about a few different things that they've got going on in their portfolio. And one of the things that they kept bringing up was this idea of being able to seamlessly move your workloads. So, a big focus of the presentation was about their disaster recovery capabilities, especially around automating the disaster recovery testing and execution process. And that's a really important thing. Testing and execution. Like, you can write up this great DR playbook, but if you don't actually try to do it, you're not going to get very far. But another thing that they mentioned that people are using their DR tools for is for migrations and app mobility, especially in the context of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, moving workloads between clouds. And so I pushed back on that a little bit and I said, well, do you know any companies that are actually doing that? Because you often hear from companies and from vendors, especially vendors, this idea that you're just going to take your app from AWS and move it to Azure because the cost is lower, or you're going to move your app over to GCP and then you're going to pull it down on prem and you're going to push it back up, and apps are just flying all over the place. And that's not how any rational business actually does their work. That's not how they function. They're not willy-nilly moving apps around whenever the price fluctuates by 2 cents on a Tuesday. That's just not how businesses work. They don't want that level of agility. They don't want that constant churn. And there's actually a lot that goes into moving an application, as anybody who's tried to do it will tell you. Now, some of the cool secret sauce that Veeam has in the background is the ability to seamlessly move from one platform to another. And especially what they were showing was with their acquisition of Kasten and the way that they're integrating it into Veeam. I believe that's what they were talking about. With that purchase and with the way they're integrating things, Kasten has the ability to back up a Kubernetes-based application on one platform, maybe that's EKS, and move it to a completely different Kubernetes platform, maybe that's AKS. And if you are someone who's in the Kubernetes space, you'll know that there are differences between the different cloud vendors, Kubernetes as a service solutions, and on-prem solutions. For the most part, they are vanilla Kubernetes. And so that component of things, the manifests as a whole, should all move seamlessly. The data should move easily. But then there's these minor differences. And a lot of them have to do with the way that networking and storage is implemented. So you'll have different storage classes. And you have to update the manifest to the storage class that exists at the target, as opposed to the way that it is in the original one. And so they showed there's actually a process within Kasten where you configure what that transform is between two manifests. And once you configure that transform, you're good to go. Now you can move that application from one to the other. But I kept coming back to the point, and I pushed them on this. Who's actually asking to do this? who's like, maybe they're saying they want to do it, but are there companies that are legitimately going, oh, my app's here on Tuesday and I want to move it here on Wednesday? And why would they do that? That doesn't generally make economic sense to try to move apps back and forth, especially if you have one team that supports AWS and another one that supports Azure. It's not the sort of thing you would generally do. And so they said, we understand the skepticism, and there are legitimate use cases for when people will do that. And the thing that they brought up, especially as it relates to the pandemic, is moving applications from on-prem up to the cloud. And that's something that people have done before. But they said, especially in the pandemic, you had these institutions that literally can't go in their data center, and things break in the data center. And if there's no option to go in and fix it in the data center because of restrictions in COVID, then their only option is to move it to the cloud. Well, guess what? They have some software. It's Veeam, it's Kasten. They can move it up to the cloud, so they're going to do that. And that makes sense. Okay, all right, I'm on board with that example. The next example is moving stuff from cloud back to on-prem. And that might seem counterintuitive. You're like, wait, you just said you're going to move stuff from on-prem up to the cloud. But what they were pointing out, and maybe I can rephrase what they were saying, is basically getting started on the cloud when it comes to cloud native is the easy button. You know, you just spin up a Kubernetes cluster on AKS. It's literally one command. EKS, if you have EKS CTL installed, it's one command and you're off to the races. But you may realize over time a few things. One, it might be actually cheaper to run it on premises once you get to a certain scale. Two, you may want to run some of your development stuff on premises. Or three, and this is the example they gave, is they had a financial services institution. And what they were doing was they were migrating the app down to an on-premises instance nightly, and then using that on-prem instance to run analytics against it. So it wasn't actually running in a production capacity, but it was a mirror of the data from the day before, and they were able to run analytics against it. And so for them, that migration made sense. But I definitely see organizations that maybe started with the easy button of the cloud and at a certain point realized, well, the applications I want to integrate this with, or the way that I run my data center, it makes sense to move that application onto on-premises. And here's a way to do that with this tool. Okay, that example makes sense. And then somebody else in the delegate panel brought up the fact that you have mergers and acquisitions. That often happens. And sometimes you leave the acquisitions resources wherever they are. So if you purchased a company, you're generally Azure and they were all in on AWS, you might just leave their infrastructure on AWS and let them continue to manage it. But sometimes it makes sense to rationalize and consolidate. And I actually did this for a financial services, another different financial services company who was on an M&A spree. They were buying a bunch of companies, and some of those companies were running on-prem, some were running in AWS, and some were running in Azure. But their model was everything runs in Azure or one of our local data centers. And so we put together a process for migrating existing applications, and they were all IaaS at that point, so it wasn't as big of a deal, but moving all of the AWS stuff to Azure, or if it's in Azure, migrating it from the existing Azure subscription to the subscriptions in the purchasing company. So that was what we did, and we were successful at it. And I said, okay, I can understand that, especially if now that you are, it's 5 years later or however long it's been since I did that project, some of these companies are now going to have Kubernetes things. Maybe you want to get them off of EKS onto self-managed Kubernetes or vice versa, because that's your standard now that you've acquired that company. Okay, that mobility story makes sense as well. So those were all the different justifications they gave for mobility. And when I thought about it, disaster recovery tools are also migration tools. And Kasten and Veeam are two tools. They have tools in their belt to provide disaster recovery, data protection, and as a result, data migration. So the story there for me is Veeam, in fact, loves mobility, and maybe you should as well. So I'm still a little skeptical about some of the people that think they're going to move their app around, but generally speaking, I'm like, okay, That makes sense. I'll give you a pass. So those are my thoughts on Veeam's presentation from this Tech Field Day. If you get a chance, definitely watch the video. I will put a link down in the description once the published videos are available on YouTube, and you can kind of just check those out. Tomorrow, there are going to be some more presentations, and I'm going to keep coming out with these videos, so stay tuned. Until then, stay healthy and stay safe out there. Bye for now.